Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Scott Sudgen. I am Product and Technology Outreach Manager here at L-Acoustics. We've got a really great conversation today with some experts about restoring creativity to House of Worship with Eliza. I want to introduce to you guys today some people that are familiar, some people you've seen before. If you're on our social media, you've recognized them in the last week or so. Josh Maichele, thank you for joining us all the way from Michigan.
Yeah. Hey, how are you, Scott?
I'm good. It's good to see you. How's everything back in Michigan? It's summertime. Have you gotten the four-wheelers out and put the snowmobiles away?
I have probably ridden 400 or 500 miles on quads and dirt bikes this spring already. So it's we've had a pretty wet and weird spring. One day it'll be 30 degrees, the next day it'll be 80. But that's pretty typical for Michigan.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Josh, for joining us. Josh, you are a House of Worship specialist in the application team. You've been at L-Acoustics now for 5 or 6 years. Obviously, this is a market and a place that's really important to you, both professionally and personally. And so this is something that I know really means a lot to you. So thank you for helping share this with us. Tim,
Absolutely.
Thank you from Nashville today. Is that correct?
Nashville, Tennessee. Yes, sir.
Tim Corder, you are with Diversified. Can you tell us more about what you do and your background in all things House of Worship?
Yes, I lead the House of Worship team for Diversified and have been in the integration market for coming on 10 years and in the live production world for probably professionally coming up on 20 years. As crazy as that is to say.
Very cool. And thank you, Tim. Now, this is, we're going to talk specifically about Mount Paran Church in Atlanta, where David Mendoza is. You're actually at the church today. Is that correct? Are you in the control room?
I am, yeah. I'm in the video control room, and I was telling Tim, it's a little different season right now, but well, thank you for having me, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm excited about today's conversation. We want to kind of talk a bit, obviously, about restoring creativity, and I think we mean that in a lot of different ways. Whether that's creativity from a music direction standpoint, creativity from a connection standpoint, creativity from an engagement standpoint. But where did this project actually start, David? What was the initial, like, hey, we need a new sound system? Is that what started this?
Yeah, so the age of the system, we were coming up on 15 years into a new building, and the system was original into the building, and so it was time for an upgrade. We were having hardware failures and amp failures and just the problems that you're going to run into when you have an aged system within a facility. So that was what brought the project to life. Got it.
And was the goal from day one to install a state-of-the-art multi-channel immersive hyper-real sound system? Was the goal to just improve things or just update to what you currently had?
Yeah, so the goal was not a state-of-the-art immersion system, as me and Tim was smiling at each other, but no, it was just to get a better balance within our mix. You have 85 to 90 channels on a weekend, and so the taxant that the system needs to be able to reproduce, that was the goal, was to get a clear, balanced mix, improve our sound, yet stay current with the times as well.
Got it. And Tim, where did you become involved in this project? Have you been a member at Mount Paran before? Do you have friends there? How did this connection happen?
Yeah, so I've had friend connections with Mount Paran for a long time, and Mount Paran is really highly regarded in the Southeast and among the Church of God denomination, and especially highly regarded for music quality, for a very forward-thinking leadership, and so Mount Paran has always been a church that was very high on my list. That would be awesome to have the opportunity to partner with. It's also probably one of the most multi-generational churches in Atlanta, and because of that, the architecture is beautiful. This is not your traditional black box room, and so as a system designer, as a technology company, it's a unique challenge when you have to integrate a new, any kind of new system into an existing space. Obviously, there's a lot more limitations at play, and so as we got started in the early conversations of this, this had been talked about off and on for a long time, and there had been various times where maybe there would be a window and it would seemed like now's the time, but the church would, for whatever reason, something would happen and the process would go on. Last year, all of a sudden, there really overnight were a number of failures that happened, some buzzes, some things happening in the system that really introduced a lot of concern. And so we dug into system designs, and as we started in the process, the most significant challenge for the audio design was that there were very large LED screens that the church had purchased a few years previously on either side of the stage. And when they moved from the original rear projection to LED screens, they actually increased the size of the screens from what they were initially, right? Because bigger screens are better, as big a screen as possible. Well, the trade-off to that was, now as we were trying to design PA, the size of those screens, and specifically how high they were and how close they were to the ceiling, made it very, very difficult to use a left-right array of any kind and stay out of the sight lines of the screens to the majority of the room. We were looking at left-right designs from multiple manufacturers, and I know there were, even other vendors that were looking at, their spin on this room. And ultimately, left-right design, when we sat in the room and looked at the modeling, there was 25 or 30% of the room where the PA would be blocking the pastor's face every Sunday, and that just wasn't acceptable.
So if I can think of this my way, your wife bought a new couch, and it turns out it's too big for the living room. Okay.
That's right.
So you had to remodel the house, is what had to happen, right? So
sure. That's right.
Got it. Okay.
The problem, the couch was blocking the TV. That was the major problem.
Got it. Okay. So that's why you got involved, Josh, because you were fine with the big couch. You didn't care, but it blocked the TV, and you couldn't see football on Sunday. So.
Right.
By
I was
football,
okay
we
with
mean
that, the armchair coming into there, but leadership wasn't.
Got it.
So Josh called one day with this crazy idea and said, "Hey, what if we thought about doing this with Elisa? What do you think people would think if we pitched something like this?" And I said, "Well, let's dig into the design and see, let's see what the pros and cons would be, and ultimately let's see what it would cost, all of those sort of things."
So
I think.
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I think that conversation actually happened before we had even had an installed venue, I think, anywhere in the world. So this was pretty early on in the stages of us deploying Elisa worldwide.
Got it. So had you, just let's think about that for a second. Tim, had you or David, let's start with Tim. Had you heard Elisa at that point? Josh says, "Hey, this new speakers everywhere, crazy." Had you even heard it?
So I feel like I have been at the forefront of this movement for a long time, of just recognizing some of the people at L-Acoustics showed this to me, again, 4 or 5 years ago, before it had marketing around it, when it was just an idea. And from the very beginning, I thought this would be a transformative technology for churches. But especially when you're introducing something new, it has to be, it's going to be a very unique situation that's going to open the door for it to be a good fit. And so for a number of years, I've been watching for that opportunity.
Got it. And David, had you heard it? So Tim and Josh came to you and said, "Hey, left-right is dead. It's the way of the past."
No, not at the time. It was a conversation with Tim and Josh. It's like, "Hey, would you be comfortable?" And we're always open at Mount Paran to what's the next biggest thing. We need to, stay on the forefront of this, get with the times. And so when Tim told me, I said, I trust you guys. I definitely want to hear it, and I definitely want to see more information about it, do my research. But no, at the time I had not heard it. No.
Wow. And did you and or any of the team from Mount Paran, did they get a chance to audition this in any way before it was installed? Did they see it at a trade show, at a concert, or was this just faith that Tim and Josh were leading you guys in the right direction?
I actually went to a Bon Iver show in Charlotte.
Okay, got it.
So there's an opportunity. I drove up, and I actually heard it. I was dying to hear it. I did my research, and I was like super excited about it. All the facts that were shown, and so I drove up to Charlotte and heard of Bon Iver, and I remember that night I was just so blown away by what they did, by what the experience that I received. And in the back of my mind, how can we make church like this, in the sense of the audio quality, the resolution, just so many factors to all the tracks that were coming through there, and his vocal, and that blew me away.
And were you alone in that? Were there any key, like, who was the ultimate decider at the church? Is this your call, David, as the technical director? Is this your call? Was there someone that had to approve this for you, or did you look at it and say this is the right choice for us as an organization to do this?
I definitely made the call on this. Leadership trusted me in that sense, and
That's really cool.
made the call. This is what we need. Leadership and I had sat down and said we need a new system. Per Tim's conversation, we had issues, and I clearly brought it to leadership and said this is what we're struggling with, and it's time. And definitely made a call on that. So
that's great. I mean, that's really.
It was interesting because. Sorry, I was just going to add a piece. It's interesting because in the design conversations, we really did not have a lot of conversation around the creative capabilities of Elisa.
Yeah.
Elisa came to the forefront because it was the only system that we could utilize that could accomplish the SPL requirements and stay out of the sight lines. And have decorrelated sources, so we knew we wouldn't have interaction between arrays. We're putting a bunch of arrays over the stage. Are we going to have a comb filtering nightmare? It was the only option that could do all of those things. And so there really wasn't very much conversation around, because it's so hard to quantify the creative side of this. It's how do you tell someone who's never experienced it before,
Sure.
What that experience is going to be like.
So was that transition like? I'm assuming this took course over a month and a half of an install. I mean, you guys were working every day, and the church was shut down for 2 months or a month and a half to do this major renovation, I would imagine, right?
He's got jokes.
You're just full of jokes today.
So a funny story, I'd like to speak on that. In that process, we also had a console failure. And so,
The dishwasher broke,
When it rains, it's cold.
the oven broke, the sink broke, and the wife said, time for a new kitchen, right?
and the TV stopped working. The sound system, the home theater just had no audio coming out of it. And
Time for a new house.
Josh was on his phone on the iPhone. I mean, so in that process, we had a console failure. We during the week I show up, verify. We were doing a couple of line checks for the following weekend and prepping for what was to be on stage. I show up and the current console does a factory wipe. Now, given that console was 15 to 20 years old as well. And so I raise the alarms. We got to do something. I bring in a rental that same day, and I'm jumping over to that rental. I'm doing virtual sound check. I'm enabling in-ears and just prepping that weekend for what now is a tight turnaround. So many inputs. I'm deciding what inputs made the list, what inputs didn't make the cut. And so that helped raise the alarm for the project we had for the speakers.
Yeah.
And kind of brought it more to the attention of leadership. We have to do something, and it's time. And it was a great feeling, that Sunday afternoon when everything went smooth, to say, okay, now I can bring it back Monday morning and say, hey, let's open the books back again because we need to get this done. And the tight timeline of that as well.
Got it.
Tim, I think it'd be interesting for you to talk about what the install timeline looked like with that being said, because people tend to have that misconception that especially that when we go in and do a new PA in a church, that the church just happens to magically move out of the main sanctuary and disappear for a month and a half. But that wasn't the case here, was it?
That was not the case. I don't know that I've ever been blessed with that scenario. I tell people all the time that renovations are the most complicated. That's the most complicated project that we would undertake because Sunday does not stop. Sunday happens every 7 days. This particular system was installed over the course of 2 weeks. We had about 90 days of lead up to the installation, and that was really a combination of just equipment sourcing and then all of the preparation that was required. You have to understand that the room had I counted it up earlier this morning. I think there were 23 individual loudspeaker hangs in the room between delay fills around the perimeter to hit upper corners of the balcony, the 7 main arrays, the central flown sub array, choir monitors. So every one of those positions, we did a number of site visits ahead of time. We did as much due diligence as we could. It's an existing space. All of the architectural plans are, a lot of them were limited in scope, and then there were changes, and we don't necessarily have as-built. So we basically did all of the diligence we could ahead of time, understanding that when we get into the room, getting the rigging points everywhere that we needed them to be would be a journey, and there would certainly be massaging. by the time it was finished, I believe all but one or two of those points had adjustments in the field. It seemed like every day our site supervisor was calling our project manager, and we're looping Josh in, and we're having conversations and say, hey, this speaker has to move 2 feet this direction and 8 inches this direction. What's that going to do? And we were just constantly having to massage all of the pieces and parts because, again, there's so much existing structure. We're trying to make things fit into that structure and look as intentional as possible.
Sure.
And I think to a person, everyone you'd talk to who was involved in this would say this was one of the most complex executions that we've probably ever done, just because of so much of that fit and finish needing to get that perfect.
But on site, you were there 2 weeks. So I'm assuming it's a 6.5 day week. You're finishing on Saturday, cleaning up, and that's starting again Sunday night, resetting for Monday morning, or is that kind of the scenario?
And that's essentially it. You pre-rig everything possible. You pull all the wire everywhere you can. You get as much work done in the week ahead of time, knowing that on Sunday afternoon or Monday morning, you're going to cut the cord, and there's no church happening in this room until you're finished and the loudspeaker system is back up.
And Josh, so this is happening. Obviously, you're tuned into this as the application engineer from L-Acoustics, and you're supposed to show up on Wednesday to calibrate a system that is now being put up for the first time on Monday morning at 7 a.m. What's that like for you walking into that space when that happens?
So this was unique on many levels for me as well, because like Tim mentioned, the week before, it was kind of like I had the bat phone there ready for when Adrian or somebody would call saying, and it was like, okay, get on the computer, quick, figure out what we need to do. Okay, it's this sighting and let's hear. Cool. Move forward. And then 2 hours later, it'd be like, okay, hey, we got another curveball for you. So kind of knew what I was getting into a little bit, but I was actually there for a whole week because we not only came in to do programming, but we did multiple days of training. We were there to run through a live rehearsal, so it was an intense time. So I show up Monday morning, and the old PA is still hanging. And in fact, part of the old PA was dangling from a motor as they were lowering it. And so I sit down and I'm programming, and PA is still coming down. Now, mind you, our PA for the most part was up at that point. But that was a very unique situation to go into, knowing that by Thursday at 4 o'clock, we had a band walking into the room, and I was on an airplane Friday morning. And in that amount of time, we had to calibrate, we had to program, we had to train, we had to figure out stuff with the Digico, because we were actually implementing the newer firmware at that point for direct desk link control and stereo groups and stuff. So there were a lot of moving parts to what happened that week.
So David, obviously this makes you a little nervous. This makes you a little terrified. This makes you giddy. What was the curve that week like? Obviously you mixed your last service on Sunday in stereo. Did you have the new desk at that point? So were you already, okay, so you kind of had that part started. And you didn't have to learn a new desk and a new PA and a new mix and a new everything. Right. You only had to learn 3 out of the 4 parts. What was that transition like? Did you feel like the learning curve was quick? Did you feel like, can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so my biggest fear was, at Mount Paran, we do a morning rehearsal. There is no midweek rehearsal. So, going in and understanding that, what is the learning curve as I pick up a new PA that's immersive, that's, latest, greatest, that I'm going to have to figure out, how it works, what it does and why it does it. And so, I remember a call to Tim was, Tim, what's the learning curve on something like this? How do I get trained after watching a ton of videos, after watching, all the resources that I could get my hands on to understand what is here to be the future of Mount Paran sound. And I just remember going over to Josh as soon as he got it up. I mean, it is awesome how straightforward the system is. It's complex, but it's just straightforward. You bring the skills that you have learned over the time with audio engineering. The signal goes in and out. You do processing at a stage. You define the pan. You figure out the balance. But within L-ISA, I mean, it was straightforward. All your tools are there at the touch of your hand. So it's more of an empowering mindset of, okay, now you're the artist. Now you're painting the picture. And you're in full control control of all the parameters that Eliza has, and they're to your advantage.
Can you describe a little bit about the system you've got? I think, I don't know if Tim, if this is your picture up, I'm going to throw it on screen here. David, can you tell us a little bit about what the Eliza sound system is in the sanctuary? What it like? Is it full surround sound with overheads?
You have what's called the scene system.
Yep.
And so as you can see in that picture, you have the 5 hangs that hang, in the image of it. And then you have the outfills, and then you have the monozones. So there is no surround. You have what's, painting a picture across the front of the stage. And so, some of the tools that you are enabled is distance, your width, your elevation. You have a reverb engine that's to your advantage as an engineer. You're able to create the sound and the reverb tail behind any mic or instrument that happens on stage. So going from a left-right scenario where, all you have is pan, you're in kind of the damage control format, because as you can see in that picture, where the speakers hung was in line with where the speakers are, the video wall screens are. And so you're about 10 to 15 feet behind the singers. And so where we came from was a damage control mindset of, I got to pick and prioritize what I want to hear, because I'm pushing so many channels out of the system, to now you have a PA that's properly hung. You've gained so much dB ahead, and now you're painting the picture, you're tone shaping, and you're looking for a sound versus, controlling feedback or controlling the aspect of a left-right behind the singers. So it was so crazy to start and say, okay, let's throw it up. Let's hear the choir. I remember looking at Tim the very first time we heard it. I mean, we both smiled at each other when he threw the praise team up that Thursday night. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this, like, now you have no limits. Now you can paint the picture with any singer. We have a 7 praise team singer lineup at the front. And so you're able to allocate where the singers are located across the front. And as you use the width tool, the worship leader on the very front center, you're able to widen that signal and just create this massive sound that just overtakes the room. And that's kind of what I heard with Bon Iver was his aspect.
Yeah, so I'm looking at these pictures, Tim, you've got there. And so, David, you're telling me that the stereo PA used to be back kind of by the video screens, right? Is that what you're saying? So,
yep.
Kind of, okay, got it.
Right
yeah. Oh, wow. So pastor and half the worship team was out in front of the PA.
Yep.
So now you're EQing for gain.
So Scott, I'll never forget the first time David had me in to mix on a weekend, and I pulled up the console, and it's fast morning, and before anyone got on stage, I was just looking at channel after channel, and I saw all of these cuts and all of these that just seemed really extreme. I said, surely someone was getting a little happy here, and we can let a little bit of this go. Until the first mic was, came out on stage, and it was like, nope, that's there for a reason. Put that back. Put that back.
Okay, so this wasn't
really
your staff, David, getting paid by the amount of EQ they use, right? So this wasn't that scenario.
Right, exactly.
Got it. Okay. So this is really that was all there because you didn't get to actually shape EQ for artistic reasons. You had to just manage the traffic. So it's kind of like going on a field trip with 6-year-olds, right? So you're not really learning. Exactly. You're just
Mount Paran has evolved. And so, the style of music that we were doing 10, 15 years ago when this system was installed is not the style of music where we're at now. And so, it worked for then because it wasn't as demanding on, the high quality audio. I think our jobs as audio engineers is to best represent what's on stage, right? And so at the time, it was not a high SPL. It was a comfort. It was a best represent there. But where Mount Paran evolved now, this is why we're here now, because we needed a system that could best represent at a higher fidelity at the top level. So that's one thing to know. Yeah, that PA was hung, but how demanding we were on the PA back then is not how we are now.
Got it. And what is PA? I'm just envisioning this as an artist on stage. PA used to be behind me. There was obviously a lot of support from that, positive and negative. I can imagine being the choir pretty much beside a giant PA. That must have felt lovely. I imagine your high passes on those mics were at 200 hertz or 300 hertz on everything. Yeah. What has this done on stage? What's the feeling on stage comparatively now that you've moved the PA out? You've made it Eliza, which takes that mix and starts to segment it a bit, so that you have a bit of a different feel. How's that on stage for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in front of the speaker loves it. Everybody behind the speakers were hating it. That was the general feeling because, you had all the reflections with that older technology to now where, you're relying heavily on the monitoring side now. Pastor in the past used to be able to speak and hear almost a surround sound for him. He had 2 monitors and 2 monitors behind him. I mean, dream scenario, if you will. But now we moved on to where you're relying heavily on your input monitoring and what the people on stage are listening to. And so as we went into the system, I sat down with our monitor guy and said, hey, your job's going to get a little more difficult, but you're going to be expected, they're going to rely on you much more heavily. But it has made the difference because now your choir mics. I remember Tim, grabbing that low pass, and I mean we're at 100, 120 on the high pass at the choir mics. So those bass parts, I mean, there's just so much more that we can achieve from that choir, and the stage noise that those choir mics are now picking up is close to none. Wow. And so that has really brought out the vocal. We talk about the Christmas show where Tim is just making magic happen from that choir and how it's overwhelming, but you're not able to achieve that without these factors that the L-ISA has been able to give us.
Got it. So David, this sounds like it was an interesting transition. I mean, it sounds like the hardest thing maybe was feeling safe and comfortable and not doing as much work as you used to do on the channel. How's that been? I'm assuming you have a team of engineers. You're not the only person mixing on Sunday. How's that been for everybody to learn? Has this been progressive? Has it been pretty quick?
Yeah, so essentially when me and Tim got together the first Sunday was let's just start bare bones. I want to hear the system. Don't bring any external tools. I mean, hear the system for what it is. Learn it. Week by week, you're going to understand more of it. And it has been that, I've understood way more of what it does, the automation aspect. When Tim was at the Christmas show and he automates the choir to go wide and then to go narrow, I mean, that moment is just incredible. So yeah, that learning curve and then training the engineers that I have here on the team, it's been very easy with the ability to give the paintbrush in their hands and say, create a sound, create the future where, the sky's the limit.
Oh, so David, are you saying that you were able to go the first weekend without running 8 Waves plugins on every input?
Yes, indeed.
I think, in fact, we didn't even hook up the Wave server for the first few weeks, did we?
Yeah. No, not at all. No, and there's that aspect. We sat down with the team and we said, even with Tim, do you even need Waves? Now it becomes as a sound artist, if you will. Now what are you looking for? Because you don't have bus compression, but you have the ability to distance channels. So, what all are you looking for when you implement the idea of Waves? Is it that the source isn't properly, mic'd, or is all that taken care of before you look at these tools of Waves and these audio plugins? We to this day are not running Waves at the front of house.
Wow.
I just haven't got to a point where I feel like, yes, we need Waves.
So
we have such a clean sound.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in a lot of mono-ish, maybe stereo-ish PAs, we have a limit of dynamic range that we can operate in. It sounds to me like when you start seeing all these things that there's a huge dynamic window, and I bet you're seeing both more and less SPL on a given Sunday. What's that like for the house? I mean, is the congregation enjoying that? Do they notice a difference?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. First week I sit down with leadership and I say, hey, so we have way more speakers that the people are going to walk in and see. And so being honest, being real as a church member, when you walk in and you see that many speakers hung, it's automatically louder for you, right? Within church, it's just, oh, why'd you guys turn it up? So we went in with the factor of let's make a good, high quality sound mix that is not extreme and pushing, the guitars and pushing these melody key parts. Let's be very clear and sound about how we implement. And so naturally, that has enabled our worship experience to progressively raise the energy. So matching up with the worship team and understanding that, hey, we're going for an energy moment now. We have the ability to create a vocal energy where when everybody's hands is immersed in worship, I'm able to kind of give them little bits and pieces that, enhance that atmosphere of worship. And so teaming up with the worship team and saying, let's create key moments within the service where I'm able to use these tools that I have now of automation, where I'm able, to use the choir. There's a 150-piece choir on stage that just sounds incredible when you make those key moments and moments to push through the atmosphere. And so, first week, funny enough, I mean, we had, for about the first month, 2 months, we had people stay over to the next service. So, first service happened and people were hanging out. Like, what is it? Like, oh my God, I want to stay for the worship set of next service. And we had to enable, overflow rooms. And it's like, no, I want to be in the room. The overflow is cool, but I want to be here in the room.
That's great.
And so, I mean, for our church, it's just been a big blessing. We've actually seen an increase in numbers based on it. Now we're able to deliver, the top-notch quality experience for our church members. And that was the goal all along, is to bring us the latest technology into the house of the Lord, but at the same time, enhance the experience for everybody going.
Sure. And so, Tim, I would assume, I just heard, and maybe Josh, you can throw the design up. I just heard more speakers. Obviously, I'm imagining this is 3 times as expensive, which is great. My kids got to go to college. I'm happy about that. Tim, it's time for the wife wants a new car, so that's all great. So, I mean, can you maybe elaborate on a vague way? Like, was this 3.5 times more expensive of a sound system for the church? Was it, all those aspects?
So when Josh first threw out the idea of doing Lisa in this room, that was my fear as well. And I just knew, we are working with fixed budgets, every church that we work with. The reality is when you're working with dreamers and when you're working with visionaries, there's never enough budget, right? Whatever there is that we'd like to do, we always have to get very creative in how to best maximize the resources. And that's where the timing, it was kind of the perfect trifecta of the advances in Elisa, and then the fact that L-Acoustics introduced the A15 loudspeaker around the same time that we were talking about this project. And I had just heard it a few months previous, and that A15 was really the piece that made the difference, because we were looking at left-right arrays in the vein of Kara, and ultimately moving to the Elisa system, it was a single-digit percentage difference.
Wow.
It was very negligible, and that was the thing, is it gave the leadership, okay, there is a way. Sure, the left-right system is just a little bit less expensive. Here's the pros and cons of that system. And then we looked at Elisa, said, okay, it was a very, very minimal amount. And the A15 is really what made all of that possible.
So this is like, I'm at the restaurant, it's a $16, gourmet burger, and for 99 cents more, I can have bacon. And it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, does that feel about right? Josh, are you with me on this bacon analogy? Is that
yeah, absolutely.
More bacon.
Yeah. If I have that beautiful steak and they tell me for 50 cents more I can have the garlic butter,
yeah,
I mean, I'm going for the garlic butter.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Got it. So you had a great quality to begin with. The stereo system would have been beautiful, but this opened a whole new horizon and everything, and it was negligible in cost, which is interesting to hear, because I think in my mind, I know everyone I talk to, they say the same thing, which is like 7 arrays, that's going to cost so much more money. And it's like, yes, but what's hard to conceptualize, and Josh, maybe you can elaborate on this, is in a left-right PA, each one is doing what, 80% of the work, and they're doing it inefficiently. Can you kind of maybe elaborate on that and what that means for the church and how that expands out?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about even taking that fire hose analogy, right? And as a sound engineer, we were basically just the gatekeepers of frequencies when we look at that left, right, or mono PA. And really, I'll call it mono PA because, we've talked about this a lot, but where is everything that mattered, right? Where's pastor's voice? Where's the acoustic guitar? Where's lead vocal? They were all pan center. So we're really looking at a dual mono or distributed mono type setup anyway. So we're taking all of these different inputs and we're putting them into the same hose, right? And there's only so much room. And so we as engineers, we make choices, whether that be, hey, the acoustic guitar sounds really amazing, but it doesn't work in my mix. So I start cutting EQ and I start doing these kinds of things. And so in an Elisa system, because we're asking each loudspeaker to only do a couple things or one thing, number one, the loudspeaker doesn't have to be able to get, composite as loud because we're asking it to only do a vocal or only do an acoustic guitar. Whereas in a left, right, or mono PA, we're shoving everything through there and it has to do all of these things. And so that's why, if you really step back and think about, David mentioned bus compression. Why do we do bus compression and all these things? I mean, I understand that there's a tonal shaping that some guys want, but the stark reality is those were tools to help mitigate problems. so that we could create space and we could create room to get everything, and so that we could get intelligibility. And those things go away with the Eliza system because we're able to ask a loudspeaker to only do a couple of things instead of 80 things, right? Wow. And that's really pivotal. And then if you start looking at how all of those things add up, well, they all add up to X volume coming through the left PA. Well, this way, each individual array in the Eliza system doesn't have to be able to produce the maximum SPL that we want in the room, because if we add all of the arrays together, that's how we're getting the total power. And when you start to think about that and step back a bit, you realize that this means that I have better intelligibility. And I think that's probably, and David and Tim can speak to this, but the vocal intelligibility is one of the most stunning things in the world when you start talking about pastor, because it creates intimacy, right? If we're hearing a lot of room and we're hearing a lot of intermodulation and we're hearing a lot of comb filtering, that tends to be distracting. It doesn't feel real. But I mean, Tim or David, what have you guys' experience been with, even just pastor speaking?
Yeah. Well, Tim, I'd like to take that. Even with pastor's vocal, there are a couple delay zones, and people were asking, well, what's the point of the delay zones? Why are you hanging so many within the ring? Well, we were just looking for that intelligibility of the pastor, and within the scene system, even, matching him up with a single source versus a band, the aspect and the clarity that we can get from that one single source is incredible. And I'll give you the secret sauce of the Eliza for the choir, right? So the Eliza is 10 or 15 feet forward from the stage, about close to the first row. And so as you bring that choir forward, you're able to kind of feel like you're within the choir. And so that has kind of been the secret sauce to our worship experiences. When that choir gets to singing and we push it all the way forward, it's kind of hard to tell, am I hearing the people sing or am I hearing the choir sing? So it naturally pushes everybody in the room to sing. I mean, it's like, it's a good feeling of like, wait a minute, is that the person next to me singing or is that the choir singing? Well, let's just sing. And so the noise floor of the vocals in the room, I can attest that has gotten louder since this system, because people are more engaged by how sonic, how clear it is. Within the vocals in the choir, and it's brought everybody's attention forward.
So this is, you're talking about using one of the parameters in Eliza. So we can see this picture Josh has. One of them is pan. You can place any choir member. And do you dynamically place those choir members? Is it always this song, it's set like this, and on this snapshot? How do you change those things? How do you interact with that? What kind of settings do you have?
Well, so you have the choir wide, the choir narrow, and so you have the distance aspects. Do I want to push the choir back? So within that picture, I'm able to group all the channels. So we have 12 choir mics within our choir loft, and so I'm able to group them, and as a whole source, either push them back or push them forward. And so it sounds crazy, and it's incredible, because I'm able to use what's called distance to push the choir to a comfortable level to where they're not the main thing, or vice versa. I'm able to create them being the main thing and push the handhelds, which is our praise team, back and create what's this distance. And so think about a moment of worship, and the choir sings a solo piece, and you're able to automate that aspect, and sitting down with the music team and saying, part of this song, what moment can we create where it's a smack in the face and you're up on your feet and your hands are elevated, and so critically sitting down and saying, okay, after that bridge, or once that last chorus hits, we're going all out, and we want the room to be fully immersed in worship. And naturally, our worship team works like that, creating specific moments within our worship set to where you're immersed fully in worship, and you feel a piece of heaven, if you will, while I'm worshiping, and that's what our choir has enabled to with the Eliza.
So
two things on that. We talk about plugins. As an engineer, I feel like plugins have their place, and Eliza doesn't remove that there are plugins that sometimes do a better job at certain tasks than on console tools. But I have two thoughts. One is the room engine. I was one who was very skeptical of the room engine in House of Worship. I thought, okay, the room engine on Broadway or in, more scripted shows, that I could see that being a cool thing, but I didn't really understand how I would use it as a tool in the room. The interesting part of the room engine is that because the room engine is built into the Elisa side rather than the console side, it's a multi-channel engine that when you pan something among the different clusters, the engine follows it. Whereas if you use on-console reverb still has its place, a snare plate, a vocal plate, whatever the case for an artistic effect. But that is ultimately just a left-right effect that I'm placing in the sound field. Whereas when I use the room engine, it is utilizing all of the speakers in the system, and it is a much more natural tool. I found that was far more useful than I expected it would be, because it just helps you. It's part of that thing that makes the loudspeaker system disappear, and you feel more connected with the people on stage. That was the first thing. The second thing is, I learned quickly. I was entrusted. I guess I was entrusted. It was an honor to mix the first weekend on the system and then get to mix the big Christmas show. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? I'm the one who was involved in the design of this. It's like, okay, put your money where your mouth is, and show us what this is capable of. But I learned really quickly that choir positioning, you could essentially, when we use the term narrow, we're essentially panning the choir out so that what you see is what you hear. It's essentially, it's a pretty narrow sound field because over the course of the entire front of the room, the choir is relatively narrow, right? But then as songs go on, typically, in order to get more impact, you either get more impact with volume, you get more impact by reducing the dynamic range, and it feels louder. Historically, we really haven't been able to use panning as a tool to make something feel bigger. And what I learned in practice is, David mentions that narrow, medium, wide. As the song gets bigger, you can make it feel larger than life by increasing that wrap around the congregation. And it's, I kind of teased about it that, those of you who work in churches, I think will understand what I mean when I say going from that medium or narrow to the wide mode is the glory button. It's like you hit that mode and it's like, what just happened? This just feels, incredible. And you didn't change the volume. It wasn't an amplitude change. It wasn't an EQ change. It was a placement change. And it's striking when it happens. The last piece of that is, having that ability of spacing. With choir specifically, you oftentimes have soloists that step out in front and, are leading a song with the choir. And in traditional left-right systems, again, back to all of those limitations, it's really hard to make room for the vocal, the lead vocal, and still have the choir big. Programmatically, creatively, for Mount Paran, when the choir is singing, the choir is really, really important. That has been very clear from day one. Well, having that panning options, I also found a lot of success being able to put a lead vocal in the middle and not put choir in the center. Actually pan choir only out to the sides, make a hole in the middle that the vocal can sit. And all of a sudden, again, you don't have to do all of this dynamic range work or these special tricks. It just naturally fits. And that's where we saw multiple times in the Christmas show where, there was one show in particular where there were two 80-year-old women. I'm estimating, I don't know that for certain, but they were, not typically the biggest fans of the front of house engineer, right? If you've mixed in church, you've certainly experienced that before. They were sitting at about 2 o'clock to me, probably 4 rows in front of me. And there were 2 times in the show where they led a standing ovation at the end of what was a huge moment. We were easily up in the high 90s. They waited slow. We might have peaked up into 100s. We were looking at each other in rehearsals, and I'm looking for feedback saying, is it okay if I go here? The music feels like I could go here. It seems like it fits. Is this okay? And no one ever questioned it. in the show, we had these 80-year-old women leading the standing ovation. I've never experienced that before. And I feel like that's a direct testimony to how these tools, your average congregant congregant cannot tell you that what it is. They don't know. It's decorrelated sources, and we're doing a 7.1. They don't know any of those things. They just know what they experience, and what they experience is at a higher level than they've ever had before.
How is this, David? This is probably more to you, and Tim, maybe you can fill in. Like, this change happened fast for you as a professional who thought about it for 90 days and had your time to get around it and experienced a show. Your creative team heard that you were doing something new. I'm imagining the uptick was a bit different, and or they've got another dimension. Traditionally, it was, okay, instrument, note, amplitude, right? They've got a whole other instrument or a whole other dimension to work with. How's that changed their process in creative, and are they engaging more in a different way now?
Yeah, so as a whole, I've brought it to the attention that, within church, your front of house guys is just as important as your lead singer. I mean, if he understands where you're taking the music, then you've won. And so that aspect of creative panning, creative automation now gives us the ability to have a working aspect to say, hey, Mark's our worship leader. Hey, Pastor Mark, what moments can we create? We have the worship team come out first now on Sunday mornings and do their rehearsal. So we're looking for key aspects on melody parts. What can I enhance within your praise team, within what we're trying to put out? And then even the way we do loops and stuff. The reason why we do loops is to enhance or enlarge a certain section of the song or add little sweeteners here and there. So how are you being strategic with what's coming, the information that's coming down the loops? Where's the placement of it? Where, you have that key little lick melody that maybe lead guitar is doing, but there's a melody pad that's behind them on the loop track. Where are you placing that? That's a conversation that we're having Thursday afternoon and saying, okay, we got all this information's coming out of these 8 loop channels. So where are we going to place them? What are we doing? What are we looking for? That's the priority. What are we wanting to space out an image within our service? So yeah, it has definitely enabled us to work creatively, hand in hand, because what you're putting from stage, I'm best representing from the booth. And if we're tied and we're hand in hand, then it's a successful product.
That's really cool. I mean, go ahead, Tim.
One piece to add to that is in the years leading up to this execution and talking to people about multi-channel loudspeaker systems, I think a common question and a common objection that people bring up is that, well, that's naturally going to lead to lots of automation. We're going to have to lock the time code. Again, Cirque has been doing this for years, right? And it's ultimately a very well-oiled machine. That's not how most churches want to have to approach their music. And so I think that's one of the biggest surprises that, David has used the term automation multiple times in this conversation. But the key, I think, that's important in that is really all that means is we have pre-established some panning moves, some preset positions, some things that can happen. And with the Digico platform specifically, and really any console that can integrate tightly with Elisa, it makes it so that the operator just has some macros that you can trigger them on the fly to change the choir panning, to bring the guitar center and put it back in a corner, and it allows all of that to be a dynamic tool, not a pre-scripted thing that requires hours of programming. You do the programming once up front, and now you have your canvas, and over time you learn other tricks and you add those tools to your
Sure.
toolbox. David, have you ever done anything yet that's locked a time code with the Elisa system?
We have yet to do that. You and I talked about it at Christmas, but no, we have yet to do that. Like I said, we don't do midweek rehearsals. So, there are other churches that do implement midweek rehearsals, and it's, we can perfect it, and there's 6 rehearsals prior to Sunday. We do one rehearsal it's a praise team, it's a band, and it's a together. That's all we get, and that's all happens Sunday morning.
Oh.
And so we understand that going in, and that's just that's our culture, and we love it, and it works for us. You know, it's generic, and it's not generic, it's unique. I'm sorry, and to the moment, and so you're able to put the aspect of worship into it. So no, we have not locked anything to time code.
So just talking, you guys were mentioning a few things of obviously being able to move things around a bit. Have you found, David, you know, the ability to connect this visual and audio? I would imagine especially important for the pastor. How about for the other aspects of the music? Have you found that to be a big transformative aspect of what's happening every Sunday? And then maybe Josh, you can follow up. I'm just curious on where this actually works, because that venue shape did not look very ideal to me for immersive sound systems. It screamed at me that it's a problem. So David, can you tell me about how you connected things?
Yeah, so to be clear, at the bottom of the balcony with the old system, we had 24 delay zones. And so on their own and kind of all underneath. And so our pastor's actually a guitar player. So that was a big factor. He's an amazing guitar player, and Tim can attest. So his interest was a clear, balanced sound across the sanctuary. And so he has a musical ear, which could put a little more pressure on me, but I love it because now, you know, I'm able to dialogue with the pastor on what I do. And so we're able to go back and forth and say, you know, he tries new pedals and he tries new gear all the time, and he loves digging in just like I do. You know, we try different sounds, we try different aspects. And so our goal was a clean, balanced mix across the spectrum. And that brings us to the point of like subs and how the configuration of subs is within our room and the mono zones. So as you can see in the picture on the outfills, you have mono zones within the room set up within the sanctuary.
Tim, you want to bounce to one of those pictures? It's a little wider, or maybe Josh. Throw that up on screen.
For that. There you go.
And so out of the Elisa processor, you know, you get a left, right, and you get a mono send back into the console. And so that's what feeds those mono zones, a processed sound that gives us a clear and clean aspect. So they're in the center, as you can see them there.
So where are the subs? Are they behind something back there, guys? I don't see any sub.
Yep. So at the center, above the scrim, so you have the aesthetic scrim. There's an array of 4 subs within that configuration.
So you said 14 subs. Is that correct?
4.
Josh, correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen most of your designs. House of Worship to me is really interesting in the quantity of LFE that's tradition. You know, I think the feeling of low frequency is quite important in the content style. So there's more subs, Josh. Where are they?
Yeah, there isn't. And it's funny, internally we joke because at L-Acoustics, I'm known as the guy who designs the most subs into stuff to help our salesmen sell the most subs. And that's not an accident. Obviously, you know, modern worship has a pretty large contour. We joke at my church that the spirit moves at 30 hertz. And so we obviously we tend to have a lot more subs. In fact, the room that I run front of house in is smaller than this room, and we have twice the amount of subs.
So hold on a second. How big is this room? This has got to be like 1,200 people for 4 sub, right? 800 people, something like that.
Oh man, it seats 2,400 people.
2,400 people. Okay, and 4 KS28 for 2,400 people. And just as a reference, I like to point out to people that's a lot of house worship designs, Josh. A size room like this would have had what, 8, 10, 12 subs distributed in positions around the room.
I think the left-right system, I think the original design for the left-right system, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, had something like 10 KS28s in it when all is said and done.
Wow.
And the experience here, and David and Tim can speak to this, but the 4 KS28s in that room are concussive for what they are. And it really made me think of that as Tim was saying, you know, that they were running in upwards of 98 to maybe plus 100 dBA at a contour. I mean, you know, this room is calibrated at the kind of contour I like, and I like a lot of contours. So we're talking, you know, 18 dB contours here. And I think it's really interesting, and David and Tim can speak more to this because they've walked the room a lot more than I've even been able to. But guys, in terms of consistency, both from the low end, but also just tonality in the room, how has that changed from the old system or from any other left-right system that you've heard?
Yeah, so one of my fears going into this was flown subs. And so the fear, as any other engineer would have, of, okay, are we going to lack the impact? Are we going to lack the punch? Am I going to lack the ability to create this moment of high sub energy? And in the past system configuration, I think there was 3 floor subs. And so there was an inconsistency in low end once you got to the balcony and to the outer skirts of the room. So that was, per our conversation with Pastor, was I need to have an even configuration of low end, whether you're sitting at the bottom or the top. And so that was also one of Tim's key points, was like us having the configuration that we have. Josh, you can probably point more to it, but the more dB that you're able to gain by coupling the 4 speakers and the even aspect that you can have by putting them in the center versus dropping them to the floor, spreading them out and arraying them, if you will. Within our room. I mean, I have people come up to me and say, hey, are those floor subs? Like, where are your subs on the floor? There's none. I mean, they're 4 flown subs, 4 KS28s in the air.
Yeah, and there are luckily we've had the ability to do lots of these different webinars with people, and there's actually a few webinars on our YouTube channel that just specifically talk about the difference between flown subs and ground subs in different sub deployments. So we won't get too deep into that today, but to say there is a great amount of efficiency that's gained by having the subs in the proximity that they are to the scene system.
Yeah.
And David, you saw this design, obviously, I don't know, several months before the install happened. You have been to many other different congregations and sanctuaries and seen how many subs they have. And Josh is telling you that 4 is going to be enough. Did it take hearing it, like or was it that Bon Iver concert you went to? Because what was that, a 20,000 seat arena, and there weren't that many subs there either. And that band has probably more low end than even House of Worship, which is somehow shocking.
Yeah.
What was it that just made you kind of like, breathe out and go, okay, this is going to be okay? Like, was it in your that first Sunday you mixing, or that first rehearsal, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was that first rehearsal. I remember as we were finishing up Thursday, I was walking the catwalk, able to see all the speaker configurations and just saying, okay, now I want to hear it. I've trusted L-Acoustics. I've mixed on L-Acoustics prior, and I know what the subs can do. I've heard KS28s prior, I know what they're able to push out, but trusting Josh and trusting his system tech and Tim's sign off as well was like, okay, well, let's hear it. Let's see what we got. And, when the band first hit, it was like, okay, we're not going to have any problems here. When we hit that first kick drum, it's like, wow, this is incredible.
And Josh, can you zoom in on that model? So for those of you who are watching live today in Teams, or if you're on YouTube watching us after this, there's a green zone there. And Josh, that represents where you hear all the different arrays at an equal SPL-ish, right? So effectively, that's the immersive zone, as we would call it. And that means that I hear that fully multi-channel mix. It looks to me like it's not covering the entire venue, which means we need fills. And I'm imagining that impacts experience in a negative way. Can you elaborate on that and your feelings, and maybe Tim and David, on what that's been like for the congregation, what that's been like for the process?
Yeah, we were a little, admittedly, a little nervous to what the fills were going to do to the, what you just mentioned, which was the ELISA zone, and knowing that we were going into this project with a 55, maybe 60% ELISA zone. Now, that maybe isn't the most ideal. In fact, as a sound designer, I would prefer that number to be 80%, 90%, right? So that everybody could have this. And so in this room, we just knew that the reason we had initially gone with the ELISA system was to solve the sightline issue. So anything that we gained from that was a win for the church and for us. I think the most amazing part for me was not how incredible the ELISA zone is, but what actually the experience was in the mono zone. And from a sound designer standpoint, I'll tell you that the experience for me is still somewhat spatialized. And I say that because typically when I'm in that area, that mono outfill zone, I normally have a left-right PA, and in very close proximity to that left-right PA, I have an outfill there. And so when I'm in that area, what does my image come from? Well, my image comes from that massive chunk of speakers hanging all the way out there. And so normally that's above my head or or let's say my left ear, right? If I'm house left. And so what's incredible about this is that the outfills or the monofill zone is actually time aligned to the center of the scene system. And so I'm imaging to the center of the stage. And that experience is so different than you normally have over there, that I feel like I got more comments from pastors and other constituents of the church during the times when we were testing and tuning and doing all this of, it's just amazing over there. Now, number one, they've probably never been very well covered over there, and we're covering it very, very well. But I think the other thing to acknowledge in that is just the fact that you have a correct image even over there.
Well,
I can speak to that. I had a friend who came to the Christmas concert, and industry friend, another fellow church staffer, and I realized that they ended up in close seats in the mono zone, and I was like, oh man, they're not gonna, you know. The feedback that I got from them after the show was just stellar, and I think I learned that I felt more comfortable with that in mixing. The first few rehearsals of the Christmas process, I was very intentional to constantly be leaving the booth and going to see what it feels like. Okay, I'm making these decisions in the middle of the Elisa zone of where I'm going to place things. How is that, how is that trading off to the mono areas? And so I would go up into the front corner where I know I'm fully in an outfill zone to see how it translated. It didn't take very long at all to realize that when I was going up into those areas, there really wasn't any change that I wanted to make. It sonically, from a tonality, a balance perspective, the Elisa processor is handling all of that down mix. As an engineer, I don't have to think about the mono zones. I place things, and then the Elisa processor is automatically creating that mono zone. Well, that's kind of scary, right? In one level, because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I don't, I'm trusting the processor to do its job. I can tell you unequivocally, it didn't take, within a rehearsal or two, I was to the point where I stopped checking. And I just made the calls that were the right calls for where I was sitting, and it translated very, very well. I never have received a comment from anyone, negative in any of those other areas. And that I'm not used to that, right? Because again, in a traditional left-right array, in that scenario that Josh just gave, you have to be very careful of what you're doing. If you pan a guitar too far to one side, to the opposite side, and now an entire part of the room is missing, it has they're hearing that guitar 6 or 8 dB down from another part of the room, that can have drastic effects on your mix. And I don't understand all of the particulars of the science of how the room engine is, or how the mix engine of Elisa is working, but I can tell you the end result is really, really seamless, and I had a lot of confidence in it very quickly.
Yeah, it's got to be really, really comforting as an engineer to find that place, because I do know what it's like to constantly be checking and tweaking mixes. And so you're not just mixing for the center where you are, you're mixing for every zone, and you're having to cognizantly be aware that this guitar change here is going to affect these people differently there. And so once you can release that mental capacity, you can focus more on the task at hand, and that's got to be really great. Josh, you pointed something out. Obviously, we do alignment back to the center. So if you do this in the right way, and this is a hard thing to conceptualize, David and Tim can attest to this. I have no doubt that you can't believe how spatial a monozone can be, meaning you still have all this depth and separation even in these monozones, and it's a function of the way the system is aligned. And it doesn't make sense intuitively because you have a mono fill, but you're still perceiving time information from a portion of the Elisa system. So you're over there going, I'm in mono, I know it, but it doesn't feel mono. It still feels fairly big. Mm-hmm. It's maybe, instead of this giant panorama, it's maybe half that, but it's still something that's quite impressive. I would imagine, though, Tim, to do all this, we had a question in from Teams today, and I think it's relevant maybe now. We're talking about the quality and the clarity and the localization. You guys also had to put a small fortune in new room acoustics in the space to deal with all this, right? Because we have a lot of new speakers.
There was not any acoustic modifications to acoustic materials in the room. Thankfully, the room is pretty well tuned. I would say, it's nicely balanced from high frequencies to low frequencies. There's some rooms I'm in that are really nicely controlled and natural in the speech range, but maybe they get out of control in low frequencies. It's not uncommon to see a second and a quarter of decay time at 1K, but you might see 3 or 4 seconds of decay time at 60 hertz. Thankfully, this room is pretty balanced. And so in that regard, I think the biggest difference is that we're very, very particular about the areas that are receiving sound. And that the end result is that the feel of the room actually improved and tightened up just a little bit because we're not spraying sound in as many places that we would have been in the old PA. There's a tremendous amount of directivity and control. David spoke to that with the onstage experience. Well, the same is true in the room. You definitely can tell the difference from previous, that the sound is more focused because it is less reflective on surfaces that we'd rather keep it off of. There are large windows down the sides of the room. We haven't talked about that. Obviously, church architects love, and natural light is beautiful in a sanctuary, but those windows are normally a significant tension for sound.
We had another question come in. Josh, maybe you can elaborate on this, or David. I see a lot of speakers. You must have had 16 racks worth of amplifiers to power all this. It takes a lot of space. Did you guys have to drag in a new power service from the local, nuclear reactor just to power all this sound? Did that change much at all, or was that a pretty quick transition? Is that a similar space? Tim, maybe you can grab that. Oh, there it is. Look at that.
Yeah, this picture is telling a great deal. So those racks were jammed full. I think they were all spaced, but they were jammed full of amplifiers that drove the previous systems. That's right. Is that right, David?
That is correct. Yeah, all packed out. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, I think there was a single space between each one, and so we had to come back around and fill all those. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with the left tower. There's still a lot. That last one on the right is our 70 volt backstage setup, but on the right side you have all the L-Acoustics amps that we are using currently.
Wow. So that's the entire system there. So it looks like you went from, what is that, 340 space or 48 space to less than 1.
Yep.
Wow. That's great.
And our financial pastor can attest that the bill has increased, and he was decreased, and he was big smile on his face.
Oh, so the power, you've noticed a difference in the power bill, utility bills?
Absolutely. Yeah, wow. Absolutely.
Wow. I mean, I guess I wouldn't have thought of that as ever something that would happen, that like in a big giant building. Time,
they monitor that, and he came over and was like, man,
wow,
new technology helps.
Wow. That's really cool to hear, because yeah, you think of a big giant building of one little thing plugged in, the sound system, and how that old technology was probably making most of the electricity into heat, right? Versus nowadays, most of it's going to sound.
Yeah.
And so I suppose you're probably cooling the room less. You're probably, all the things just start compounding on that line.
Yeah, and even structurally speaking, the weight of the old system and how big and heavy it was. I can't remember exact numbers, but I think we were in a couple 1,000 pounds difference.
Wow.
Of where we were on the stress on the structure of the building, and now where we are, and just how much better and sonically enhanced we are.
Now you can hang more video walls, David.
Yeah, that's next. Oh man,
this is really cool. I'm really glad to hear of such a transition for an organization and for a creative team, for a congregation, to be able to connect in this new way musically and in person. Obviously, this is a weird world we're in right now. I hope that soon you guys will be able to be together safely in person. Is there any thought on that yet? Has that happened? Are you guys actively planning for that return to service?
Yeah, we are actively planning right now. There's just actively praying as well.
Sure.
But yeah, we're going in and we record services in the room and stuff like that. So there is that happening. The system's still in use, but we're actively planning for a welcome back.
That's going to be, I'm sure everyone is looking forward to that. I know I'm looking forward to going out and seeing people in person, seeing gatherings, enjoying each other's space and time. So I'm definitely looking forward to Well, guys, I have one last question. I'm going to put you on the spot here, so I'll give you a second. Josh and I will tell a story or something while you guys can think about this. Tim and David, you guys have been in this industry for long enough to have seen different bits of technology, and some of them have been more transformative than others. Is there anything in your mind? You know, I'll throw a couple of examples out, and then you guys can run with it. You know, maybe a digital audio workstation. If you were old enough, I don't know if you are, David, to have recorded on tape and then go into a DAW. Tim, you know, I don't know if you ever got to, you know, mix on, you know, non-programmable desk, but, you know, I mean, I remember the first time I used
4,000, baby.
Yeah, I remember doing an Easter service in Milwaukee, Wisconsin once with a recallable, you know, Midas XL3, or pardon me, XL4, or wow, what the desk was it? With the flying faders and programming automation, and mixing monitors on that was shockingly different to have the ability to save a scene. I had 10 scenes, and that was a pretty big deal versus having to chart a desk. But Tim, is there any bit of technology you've seen in your career that's been transformative, you think, something that's iconic to you?
You're lobbing to avoid the feeling that you're lobbing a softball.
Try not to.
I do think that this the idea of a transition from essentially a mono experience in a live performance, you know, a performance. We don't have mono in any other part of our life, right? I'm wearing 2 AirPods. We have 7 to 10 to 12 speakers in our cars. The ability to introduce a sense of space into a worship environment specifically, but I mean, live performance in general, feels like very much the same transformative nature as the first digital live sound consoles and DAWs and, you know, advances in wireless mics and all of those various things. It's easy to just take that on the face value of words, and it is very difficult for, if you have not experienced it, to really reference what we're talking about until you experience it. And that's what I tell people all the time. Even going into Mount Paran and listening to virtual soundcheck tracks is a different experience than actually being in the room and seeing the people on stage and being a part of the congregation. I think for a long time I discounted the value of what you hear is what you see. And I didn't think that it mattered as much that that when that you could pick out someone on stage and you could actually hear them lined up with what you see. After you experience that for a little while, it really messes with you to take it away. And I think that was my biggest surprise. That was certainly that and the Room Engine were my 2 biggest takeaways from being in the seat actually as an engineer. We are on the forefront of a very transformative process to live performance. And it's really an honor to get to be at the forefront of that with a church like Mount Paran. You know, it's fun that this isn't a black box room. This isn't a typical rock and roll band. Like this is not what I think a few years ago L-Acoustics or my team would have identified as the first Elisa system in the world in a church, right? And I think that is all the more a testimony to the power of this technology in the right hands.
Well put.
Yeah, I think I agree with Tim. I'm spoiled now, Scott. I'm very spoiled because I go into the second room, our second largest room, which is a left-right, and I continuously feel like I'm limited and I'm looking for it doesn't glue like it does in the sanctuary.
High class problems, David. High class problems.
But I do agree. I mean, you mentioned, I'm young. I'm a millennial. I mean, my generation is only looking for that more. And we want to be wowed and we want to take it to the next level. And we're surrounded in technology. And how can we best enhance this technology at the highest level? And so with virtual reality, with immersive audio, this is going to become the future. I mean, this is the future of audio as we know it, because as Tim best explained it to me when we first talked about this project, what you see is what you're gonna hear. And so if you're singing on the left side of the stage, you know, and you're here close to me, why do I have to hear you, you know, on this side of the room? Why can I not allocate the sound or speaker to where I see you? And so it's gonna really separate the aspect of the left, right, and the immersive very soon, to the point where we're gonna spoil people, and they're gonna automatically be able to tell what's immersive and what's not. And even like with my mom, I brought her before we installed the system, and I said, listen to the system, and I want you to make a mental note, and I want you to listen when we install. And somebody that's not, you know, tech savvy, somebody that's not, you know, doesn't know the terms, doesn't know what she's looking for, was able to tell me there's a big difference that I can hear within what the information that I'm being given, with both systems and immersive and in not, and the ability to pan and move stuff around.
That's great.
So I think there's going to be a bigger want for that.
You know, I'll jump in. I've had a chance to think about this question because I wrote it. For me, I'm also lucky. I'm a bit older. I'm not a millennial, so I actually got to use old PA. You know, those kind where they were measured in a grid. You know, and yeah. So you know, I mean that you know, change to line source arrays was fairly remarkable. Albeit that's when I was starting my career. So, you know, you just don't realize how big of a leap that was until you talk to someone who got to mix on that, and you know, they were just happy if they could understand things, right? And then we went to line source arrays, and now we're happy that we can understand all things. And then we go to Lisa, and now we're happy that we can, you know, we just keep adding dimension to what we're doing. So it's really cool to hear. Josh, I don't know if you want to jump in on this. If you've got something, you've done a few things in audio as well. If there's anything for you that stood out.
You know, I think for me, I take it from the stance of being a system designer and system calibrator, that one of the most transformative things for me doing what I do for a living daily has been DSP-driven amplification, but ecosystem-driven manufacturers, because what that's done for me has allowed me to glean all of this knowledge from these guys who have PhDs in things. And, you know, I fancy myself to be a pretty smart guy, but I'm not that guy. And I don't ever think that I know more than that guy when it comes to what the speaker should sound like and what it should do. And so that's been majorly transformative for me in my career, and is a huge reason why I'm here with L-Acoustics as well.
Cool. Well, guys, this has been a lot of fun. We could keep talking, and I think the live audience on Teams has asked us to just not stop. I'm sure we could keep telling stories, but we've used up a lot of people's time. I really want to thank you if you were joining us live today. Please don't hesitate to send us comments. Join us in social media. Tim, you're on social media everywhere as well. Do you have a handle? Do you have a Twitter account?
Yep. Yeah, you can find me at Tim Corder. Easy.
Perfect. David, are you sharing Instagram photos of your lunch every day?
I am, yeah. We were at the SunTrust, or I guess Truist Park yesterday, and we're going to figure out today where we're going to go.
Good, excellent. And Josh, you're having a burrito delivered in probably the next half hour, I'd imagine.
I mean, I think they're a little late. Yeah, I have a bit of an addiction to Chipotle, but
hey, if the worst thing that's happened during COVID is 19 pounds, that's a pretty good thing. So, guys, thank you very much. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I'll put in the link here below if you're still listening. There's a note to that YouTube webinar that Josh referenced, all about subs, flown, or ground stacked. It's a really fun one. And we'll put some links to Diversified and Mount Paran Church as well. So guys, don't hesitate to reach out to them and find them on social media. Everyone, thank you very much for joining us. David, Tim, it's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.